d4, the game kicks off. Knight f6, c4, g6. Are we going to witness the King's Indian or the Grunfeld? Madaminov plays bishop to g7, bg2, and we have the Grunfeld on the board. Now Magnus wants to take the pawn, hesitates a bit, takes it, knight takes d5. Now e4 is a good move here, gives white a small edge, but Magnus plays his knight to f3, which is also fine. Black castles. And what I like about Madaminov's strategy here is that he's moving quickly. He knows the opening, he doesn't waste time here, because he knows that time is going to be very crucial in later stages against the world champion. Magnus, of course, knows this position very well, but he's thinking about some sidelines which will throw his opponent off balance. Should he go knight c3 here? Should he play something else? He goes knight to c3. And now knight comes out to c6, attacking the pawn on d4. e3 is the main line, but you can be sure that Madaminov is well prepared against it. So what does Magnus do? You can see the time. He has 2 minutes 18 seconds while Madaminov has full set of 3 minutes left on the clock. What should Magnus do here? He thinks for a bit, still not sure, goes bishop f4. And his opponent takes it instantly. Knight takes e5. This is the best move to equalize for black. Magnus is a bit surprised that his opponent knows this. Bishop takes e5, bishop takes e5 and e3, but look at the position, guys. After this c6 move, blunting the bishop on g2, black has the bishop pair here and a clearly fine position out of the opening. One can even go on to say that this is slightly preferable for black already. Madaminov wants to take on d4 perhaps, but then he gives up his bishop pair. But does he win a pawn? He doesn't get enticed by that. He goes queen e7, which is a very, very fine decision, a level-headed call. Queen to e7, rook moves to d1, and bishop comes out to g4, attacking d1. You don't want to be playing a move like f3, and that's why Magnus puts his rook on d3. And Madaminov brings his rook to the center, h3. f5 is taken by the knight, so is e6. Maybe you can drop your bishop back to c8, keeping the bishop pair. But I think the youngster wants to chop off the knight on d4. And he does it. He takes on d4. Of course, you can't take with the pawn because bishop f5 would pin. So he takes with the rook. Rook takes, pawn takes, and now bishop f5. This is an isolated pawn, and definitely black is doing very well here. Rook to d8, rook d1. Now something like h5 seems like very solid position for black. You can even play bishop e6 to control the d5 square. This is slightly weak. Madaminov goes queen b4. Maybe this allows d5 liquidating move. Does Magnus want to play that? Not really. He goes a3. Queen to b3. The queen settles down on a good square. It's amazing that this 23-33 rated IM is actually giving Magnus such a tough fight, and he's also ahead on the clock and making great moves. g4 played by Magnus. The bishop goes back to c8, and now knight comes out to e4. Magnus slowly starting to turn on the screws. Is he looking at c5, at f6? The knight is looking good. Now Madaminov has 1 minute 50 seconds. He goes knight to d5. That's a good move. Rook e1 played by Magnus. If somehow he can go to c5 with his knight, then maybe chop off the knight, then his rook stands on an open file. These are some of the ideas that Magnus has on his mind. He goes back queen b6. And I think it's time for Magnus to sink in his knight to c5. He does so. The knight is sitting well on c5, and he plays queen to c7. This is not a great move because now bishop takes d5 is a strong move, but he goes queen g5 because bishop d5 would have been nice because you couldn't have taken with the rook. There were problems on the back rank, so he had to take with the pawn, which would have given white an advantage. But Magnus is also a bit rattled here. Although now, time-wise, he's doing well. He's moved ahead on the clock. I think it's time to take on d5 perhaps. Bishop d5, rook d5, and then a very nice move, rook e7, an intermezzo, because you can take the queen, I can also take your queen. I think Magnus is calculating this line, but he goes knight d3, and that's not a great move because now bishop e6, and black is doing pretty fine. Knight c5, bishop c8. Of course, black is fine with a draw against the world champion, but Magnus wants to win. He wants to become the champion, and this is a critical game. He has the white pieces. His opponent is also not a super GM. So this is a game he must try and win. But now he's down to 44 seconds. He's going low on time. Madaminov has 1 minute 14 seconds. He also looks more comfortable here. Facing the world champion is never easy, but he seems to have eased into it. Knight d3, bishop e6. Is Magnus going to repeat? Not really. He brings his queen back. Madaminov goes b6. He stops the knight from coming to c5. Rook c1 by Magnus, trying to put pressure on this weakened c6 pawn. But the queen comes to d6, and now c5 could be on cards. What will Magnus do? Maybe b4, stopping c5 could be an idea, but look at the clock. Magnus down to 20 seconds. Oh my god, how is the world champion going to handle all of this stress? His position is not better. He's down to his last 10 seconds. Knight e5, knight e7. He could have also pushed c5, by the way. That was a nice move there. Takes on c6. Magnus goes for some kind of a tactic here. Queen d4, rook d4. Actually, it's just an exchange, and the position is now around equal, maybe even slightly preferable for black. Now goes for a rook c7 check. King h2. Now rook d2 is important, but Madaminov goes rook d7. Trading this was not important, and g5, fixing the pawns on light square. This little move, of course the position is still a draw, but this is pure Magnus style in endgame. You know, he's going to try and press with every little chance that he gets. Of course, this position is still a draw. f6 should have been preferred to exchange more pawns, but Madaminov is not playing the endgame as well as he was playing the opening and the middle game. King e3 played, king to c5. And now, what does Magnus do? He goes king d3, a5 played, king c3. And you want to keep your pawns on dark squares because you have a bishop on light squares. But a4, oof. Why this decision to fix the pawn on a light square? This can become a weakness in future. Bishop e6, bishop e2. But I think what Madaminov wants to do is he wants to sort of fix the white pawns. Bishop d5, Magnus goes bishop d7, attacks the pawn. b5, bishop e8. Now you can see all the pawns fixed on light squares. Unbelievable how Magnus magically, like a magician, has put Madaminov under pressure. But still, how to break through? Because this bishop is attacking b5, defended by the king. It's attacking f7, defended by the bishop. But I think the white king is coming in from here. So he goes bishop c4, king e4, king d6, and now king to d4. It seems like black is in zugzwang. Bishop c6, king d6, and Magnus comes back. What is Magnus's winning plan? Well, maybe he's just waiting. If the bishop moves, he wants to go bishop d3, attack the pawn. If the king moves, he wants to enter here. Still, bishop e6 should be preferred. You cannot move the king because then the white king comes inside and then it's all over. Madaminov also coming low on time. He's down to 20 seconds. He's feeling the pressure. Magnus Carlsen showing his endgame magic here. The world champion is known as endgame god for a reason. King e6, blunder here. Magnus moves in. He knows that he's winning now. King comes to c5, king e5, bishop c6. The pawns are falling on the queen side. Bishop b3. Magnus is going to take the queen side pawns, but Madaminov is going to take the king side pawns. Who's faster here? Bishop a4, the bishop falls. He can't exchange. He can't exchange. He would be too slow. He needs to come back. He needs to move his bishop back. He goes bishop d5, but Magnus now trades it because if you move the bishop, the f7 pawn is going to fall. Magnus Carlsen has managed to somehow trick his opponent here. King f4 trying to come in. Pawn pushes. a5, king d6. Magnus brings his king in, and now f4 stopping the king side pawn. Magnus knows it was a tough win there.